Tom Briggs had spent so many years living alone that the silence of the desert had become a kind of companion. At 72, he had grown used to waking before the sun rose, sitting on his old wooden porch with a cup of black coffee, and listening to the wind move across the dry land. His small ranch, tucked deep in a valley of red earth and tall sagebrush, felt like the last corner of the world where time still walked slowly. He had no rush, no noise, no demands, only the soft creaking of the porch boards, the distant call of a hawk, and the occasional scrape of his old boots as he moved around the property. His days followed a pattern he rarely changed. He fed his horses, checked his fences, fixed anything that needed fixing, then spent the afternoons either carving small wooden animals or sitting quietly with his memories. He was a man who had lived a full life, years on cattle drives, dusty rodeo arenas, long nights under wide skies, and he carried those memories like shadows that walked behind him. But solitude had wrapped around him gently as he aged. After he retired, he found comfort in being alone with the land he loved. That particular evening, the sky looked different. Clouds gathered low and heavy across the horizon, carrying the scent of a coming sandstorm. The wind shifted, growing sharper, brushing dust against Tom's cheeks as he secured tools and tied down loose boards. He muttered to himself about the desert's unpredictable moods, tightening knots with practiced hands. While walking back toward the house, something caught his eye in the distance. At first, it looked like shifting shapes in the rising storm, blurred by heat and dust. Tom stopped, narrowed his eyes, and watched closely. The shapes grew clearer, 5 figures slowly making their way across the open land. They walked with steady steps. Even though the wind pushed against them, their movements were careful but determined. Tom's heartbeat quickened. Visitors were rare in his isolated valley, and people walking through a storm was even stranger. As the figures drew nearer, he realized they were 5 women, all dressed in traditional Apache clothing, carrying bags that looked worn from travel. Their faces were calm but tired, as though they had walked a very long way. The closer they came, the heavier the feeling of seriousness settled in Tom's chest. Something had driven these women here. He stepped down from his porch and met them halfway. The wind whipped dust around them, making speech difficult, but the first woman, tall, dignified, with silver woven into her dark braids, spoke clearly. She introduced herself as Maria and explained that she and the other 4 women were widows from a reservation community several miles away. A wildfire had swept through the edges of their land 2 days earlier, destroying the small homes they had relied on. They had nowhere safe to stay until repairs could be made. Tom listened quietly, watching their faces, noticing the exhaustion in their eyes, and the strength in the way they stood. They did not beg. They did not complain. They spoke with calm respect, asking if he could offer temporary shelter while they figured out their next steps. He could tell they carried deep sorrow behind their calm expressions, a sorrow older than the fire that had taken their homes. He hesitated not because he did not want to help, but because it had been so long since he had shared his space with anyone. His home had become a place built for one person, both physically and emotionally. The idea of suddenly having 5 guests unsettled him, but the thought of turning away women walking through a storm who had already suffered so much loss felt wrong. He nodded slowly, clearing his throat. He gestured toward the ranch house and said they were welcome to stay as long as they needed a safe place. Relief softened the tension in their shoulders. One of the younger widows, Lena, thanked him with a gentle voice, while another, Alona, helped steady an older woman named Nomi, who was struggling against the wind. As they walked toward the house, Tom noticed the way they moved together, supporting each other without speaking, sharing weight, sharing strength. It made him think about his own past, the people he had once depended on, the friendships forged over long miles and difficult years. Without realizing it, he felt a quiet respect forming inside him. Inside the house, the widows settled near the fireplace, warming their hands and brushing dust from their clothes. Tom fetched extra blankets, feeling oddly unsure as he placed them near the women, suddenly aware that his home looked rough and plain. He had never cared much about decorating or keeping things perfectly neat, but he noticed the widows did not seem bothered. They accepted the simple space with gratitude. They introduced themselves properly once the storm wind softened outside. Maria was the eldest, calm and thoughtful. Taza, the second oldest, had a steady gaze that seemed to read the room in silence. Lena, soft-spoken but practical, carried most of the supplies. Nomi was older and gentle, with a quiet strength behind her frail appearance. Alona, the youngest, carried herself with a mix of sadness and determination. Tom listened, saying little. He never had been much of a talker, but he made sure they had water and a place to rest. Once they had settled, he stepped outside for a moment, breathing in the sharp desert air. The storm clouds had thickened, turning the sky into a copper-colored dome. The ranch, which usually felt peaceful in storms, now felt different, full of new voices, new stories, and a sense of change. As he stood there, he wondered how long it had been since he had allowed anyone into his routine. The silence he once cherished suddenly felt far away, replaced by a new kind of uncertainty. But as he looked back at the warm lamplight spilling from his front window, he also felt something else, something he couldn't quite name. It wasn't discomfort. It wasn't fear. It was more like the faint stir of a life he had forgotten. A life where people came and went, where kindness created connections, and where he wasn't just a man waiting out his years alone. He returned inside and found the widows already adjusting to the space. They sat together, speaking softly in their own language, sharing quiet, comforting gestures with each other. Tom sat in his old armchair, listening to the sound of human presence, rustling blankets, light conversation, the gentle rhythm of breaths. It felt new and familiar at the same time. The storm outside grew stronger, rattling the windows, but inside the small ranch house there was warmth. Tom realized he had made the right choice. Maybe this was not just about offering shelter. Maybe life had brought these women to his door for a reason he did not yet understand. That night, as he turned off the lamp and let the room fall into calm darkness, Tom felt something he had not felt in years: hopeful curiosity about tomorrow. The widows had arrived unexpectedly, carrying stories he had not yet heard. But something told him this was only the beginning of a journey he had never imagined. Tom woke before sunrise, as he always did, but the morning felt different. For the first time in many years, there were quiet sounds inside his house that did not come from old wood or wind. Soft footsteps, gentle whispers, and the faint clink of metal told him the widows were already awake. He sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes, unsure of how to act in a home that was no longer completely his own. But when he stepped into the kitchen, he stopped in surprise. Maria and Lena were preparing breakfast, not a full meal, but simple things they had found in his kitchen. They moved with quiet respect, taking up only a small corner of the space, as if they wanted to avoid disturbing anything. The smell of warm bread and herbs drifted gently through the room. Maria looked up, offered him a small nod, and said good morning in a calm voice. Tom returned the greeting, though he felt awkward, as if his own house had become unfamiliar to him. Taza sat near the window, repairing a torn bag with neat, skillful hands. Alona and Nomi were sorting their belongings, folding clothes that had gathered dust during their long walk. Their movements were slow but steady, like people who had endured too much but refused to break. Tom stood for a moment, unsure of where to step or what to say. He had forgotten what it felt like to share silence with others. Lena offered him a plate of warm bread. He hesitated, then accepted it, moving to his usual chair near the corner of the kitchen. The seat creaked beneath him, and he noticed the widows glance at the chair with soft amusement, as though they found comfort in the house's natural sounds. Maria thanked him again for letting them stay, reminding him that they would not trouble him more than necessary. Tom shook his head, saying it was no trouble. He didn't say it out loud, but a part of him already felt less lonely with them there. After breakfast, Tom began his daily routine. But now, the widows followed, not to supervise or intrude, but to help. When he stepped outside to feed the horses, Lena and Alona joined him. They watched carefully as he scooped hay and checked the water trough. Alona, who seemed comfortable around animals, gently reached out to stroke the muzzle of his older horse, Blaze. The horse gave a soft snort, accepting the touch. Tom was surprised. Blaze rarely allowed strangers near him so quickly. Alona simply smiled, saying some animals recognize gentleness faster than people do. Meanwhile, Maria and Taza helped sweep dust that had blown into the porch overnight. Nomi stayed inside, folding blankets and keeping things tidy. Tom tried to object at first, insisting they were guests, not workers. But Maria politely told him that helping around the ranch made them feel more at ease. They were used to doing things with their hands, and sitting idle made them feel restless. Tom understood. In his own way, he felt the same. Throughout the morning, he learned small details about their past. Not deep stories, just small pieces that gave shape to who they were. Maria had once been a teacher. Taza had strong skills in crafting and sewing. Lena used to help with community gathering events. Nomi had raised children who now lived far away. Alona was the youngest and had studied traditional herbal practices from elders. Their voices carried sadness when they mentioned the wildfire. But Tom noticed they did not speak much about their late husbands. Their grief was quiet, held in respectful stillness, as if speaking too much about it might reopen a wound they had learned to live with. After finishing the morning chores, Tom showed them the storage shed, where they could find extra tools, blankets, and supplies. The widows examined everything with care, treating each item as though it held importance. They were not wasteful people. They touched things lightly, looked at them thoughtfully, and returned them neatly. Their respect made Tom notice how messy he had allowed things to become over the years. He felt almost embarrassed, but the widows did not scold or judge. They simply organized small parts of the shed as they worked, creating calm order in places Tom had ignored. As the sun climbed high, they returned inside to escape the heat. Tom prepared water and fruit, placing them on the table. The widows accepted with gratitude. And for the first time since they arrived, there was gentle laughter as they shared memories of small things, funny stories from their childhoods, moments when animals had caused mischief, or simple mistakes made during early learning days. It surprised Tom how easily they created warmth in the room. Their laughter was soft, not loud or overwhelming, but it filled the empty spaces in his house like sunlight. Later in the afternoon, when the heat softened and a breeze cooled the land, the widows asked if Tom could show them more of the ranch. He agreed, and led them through the fields, past the small barn, and toward the ridge that looked over the valley. The sandstorm from the previous day had left traces wind-carved lines on the ground, scattered dry leaves, and cracked soil, but the land still held its quiet beauty. The widows admired the wide sky, the red cliffs, and the thin green patches near the small stream. Walking together, Tom realized something important. Even though these women carried heavy sorrow, they also carried a deep appreciation for life. They noticed small details, patterns in the rocks, shapes in the clouds, birds resting on fence posts. Their presence made him see his ranch with fresh eyes, as if the land had become new again. As they walked back, Maria told him more about the wildfire. It had started suddenly and spread quickly. Smoke filled their homes before they could gather their belongings. They had survived by evacuating early, but their houses were left badly damaged. Repairs were underway, but it would take time. Their community was supportive, but resources were limited. They had walked far to avoid overcrowding shelters and to give rescue teams more space to work. Tom listened quietly. Every word pulled him deeper into understanding their situation. These women were not weak. They were strong in ways he respected deeply. They did not ask for sympathy. They only asked for temporary safety, and even that request had been made with humility. By evening, the ranch felt alive in a way Tom hadn't expected. The widows helped prepare a simple dinner, using spices they carried in small pouches. The food tasted different, earthier, herbal, comforting. As they ate together, the house filled with the gentle hum of conversation. Tom, who often ate alone in silence, found himself listening, responding, and even smiling. He didn't realize how much he had missed voices other than his own. After dinner, the widows gathered near the porch and watched the sky change colors as the sun set. Tom joined them. The desert glowed in shades of gold and soft red, and the air grew cool. For a long time, they sat without speaking, just watching the slow fade of daylight. Tom felt peaceful. The widows seemed peaceful too. Before going inside, Maria thanked Tom again, her voice sincere. She told him they were grateful for his kindness and would not forget it. Tom nodded but said little. He didn't need words. A quiet bond had already formed. Something built, not from dramatic moments, but from simple acts of trust and respect. That night, as Tom lay in bed, he listened to the soft sounds of life in his house, the quiet breathing from the next room, the faint whisper of someone turning over, the comfort of knowing he wasn't alone. He realized that the widow's presence had already changed something inside him. The silence he once thought he needed no longer felt as comforting as it used to. Now, he found comfort in the gentle presence of others, in the knowledge that kindness had brought them together. And though he didn't know what the coming days would bring, he felt ready for the change. This new story, formed in the middle of the desert, was only beginning. The next morning began with a gentle quiet in the house, the kind of peaceful silence that comes not from emptiness but from calm company. Tom woke early as usual, pushing himself up slowly from his bed, expecting to hear the same soft sounds he had grown used to over the last couple of days. But when he stepped into the kitchen, he found something that made him pause again, the same way he had paused many times since the widows arrived. The table was already neat and clean, and a small breakfast had been prepared: warm flatbread, sliced fruit, and tea that carried a soothing herbal scent. Maria smiled at him with a peaceful expression as she poured a second cup. She did not speak much, but her presence filled the room with a sense of order and calm. Lena stood by the window, looking outside, studying the sky as if reading quiet signs in the shifting colors of dawn. Tom thanked them quietly and took a seat, feeling the warm cup in his hands. For so many years, his mornings had been slow and empty. Now they held new shapes, voices, movement, and the comfort of shared moments. Even the silence felt different. It felt alive. After breakfast, Tom prepared to start his usual chores, assuming the widows would rest or stay inside. But he was wrong again. Just like the day before, they joined him without hesitation. Alona tied her hair back and said she wanted to check on the garden behind the shed. She had noticed yesterday that the plants looked weak, the soil dry and cracked. Tom had not tended the garden in a long time. He had grown vegetables when he was younger, but over the years, he had slowly let it go. Alona knelt in the dirt, gently touching the leaves, examining the roots, talking softly about which herbs could survive desert heat, and which ones needed more care. She spoke from experience, not from books. Tom watched her work with careful, respectful movements, as if the plants were small lives she was responsible for. Maria and Taza helped clean the barn, brushing away dust and reorganizing tools. They moved slowly but steadily, sharing quiet conversation as they worked. Tom noticed they treated his belongings like they were part of a shared space, not his alone. Nothing was moved without reason. Nothing was touched without care. Nomi stayed near the porch, sewing torn pieces of cloth into strong, useful patches. She hummed softly while she worked. The tune was slow and soothing, carrying a sense of old traditions and memories. As the day warmed, Tom decided to show the widows a part of the ranch he rarely visited anymore, the far paddock near the ridge. It was a long walk, but the widows seemed eager. They walked together, their footsteps steady, their soft voices rising gently above the breeze. The far paddock was surrounded by tall, dry grass, and the fence needed repair. Tom explained that he hadn't used it in years, because maintaining it alone had become too difficult. The widows examined the broken posts and worn wire with serious eyes. Lena and Taza discussed ways to reinforce the structure using materials they had noticed around the ranch. Tom felt a quiet admiration rising inside him. They were not afraid of work. They were people who believed in rebuilding what was broken. When they paused to rest, the widows shared stories, not deep, painful ones, but small pieces of their lives that brought warmth to the moment. Lena spoke about learning to cook with her grandmother, how every dish carried a memory. Maria talked about teaching children and how she missed the feeling of helping others learn. Taza shared experiences of crafting items for community events. Nomi recalled quiet evenings with her family long ago. Alona spoke of the elders she had trained with, who taught her to understand plants like living friends. Tom listened, saying little. But each story reminded him of a world he had forgotten existed, a world where people supported each other, shared responsibilities, and made everyday moments meaningful. He realized he had spent too many years thinking independence meant doing everything alone. Yet here, walking with these 5 women, he understood that independence could still include companionship. On the way back, the group stopped near the small stream that ran behind the ridge. The water was thin but clear, moving quietly across smooth stones. The widows knelt to wash their hands and splash their faces, laughing softly at the cool sensation. Tom stood nearby, watching them, feeling unexpectedly light inside. Their presence did something to the air around him, softened it, warmed it, made the ranch feel less like the last piece of a lonely life, and more like the start of a new chapter. In the afternoon, the widows decided to prepare a meal for Tom as a gesture of gratitude. They gathered herbs from the small garden patch Alona had cleaned, added simple ingredients Tom had in the pantry, and cooked a dish that filled the house with a comforting aroma. Tom sat quietly as they worked, observing the harmony between them. Each woman moved naturally in the kitchen, forming a rhythm of cooperation. It reminded him of the old cowboy teams he once rode with, where everyone understood their role without needing many words. When they finally sat down to eat, Tom felt something he hadn't felt in a long while, a sense of being cared for. The food was warm and comforting, flavored with herbs that seemed to carry a sense of healing. The widows ate slowly, savoring each bite, and the conversation drifted from the food to stories about the desert's ways, how the land changed with the seasons, and the importance of respecting nature. After the meal, Tom decided to share a bit of his own past. He talked about his early years working on cattle drives, the long nights under the stars, the friendships he had formed with other cowboys, and the sense of freedom he once lived for. His voice was steady, but the widows listened with deep interest, their eyes showing warmth and understanding. They asked him gentle questions, not prying, just curious, and Tom found himself telling stories he had not told anyone in years. Stories about the horses he had trained, the storms he had survived, and the simple joys that had once filled his life. Sharing these memories made him feel strangely lighter, as if he had opened a window inside himself and let in fresh air. As the sun began to set, the group gathered on the porch again. The sky shifted into shades of purple and gold. A soft wind moved across the land, carrying the scent of sage. The widows wrapped shawls around their shoulders, and Tom leaned against the porch railing. A quiet peace settled over them as they watched the day fade. The widows sat close together, their presence calm and strong. Tom realized he was beginning to understand them not through words alone, but through the way they moved, the way they shared silence, and the way they treated the world around them. He thought about how they had lost so much, yet carried themselves with dignity. How they smiled softly at simple moments. How they worked together without complaint. Their resilience reminded him of a strength he often saw in the desert itself, a strength shaped not by power, but by patience. As darkness settled and stars appeared, Tom felt something new forming inside him, something that reached beyond gratitude or kindness. It was a sense of connection, growing slowly like a small flame. He didn't know what the next days would bring, but he knew the widow's presence had already changed him in ways he had not expected. That night, lying in bed, Tom listened once more to the sounds in the house. The quiet breathing, the soft rustle of blankets, the comfort of knowing he was no longer alone in the world. The silence he had once lived in felt gentler now, filled with meaning instead of emptiness. And as he closed his eyes, he felt certain that this unexpected chapter of his life still held many moments waiting to unfold. The following morning, the air around the ranch felt calm, but Tom sensed something different waiting in the day ahead. He stepped outside with his usual cup of coffee and watched the sunlight spread slowly across the desert. The widows were already awake, working quietly around the yard. Maria was sweeping dust from the porch. Lena was airing out blankets. And Alona was checking the garden she had started to revive. Everything looked peaceful, yet Tom couldn't shake the feeling that the day would bring something unexpected. By mid-morning, the sound of a vehicle engine rumbled through the valley. It was unusual. Rarely did anyone drive out this far, unless they had a reason. Tom set down his tools and looked toward the dirt road. A shiny black truck appeared, kicking up dust as it approached. The widows paused what they were doing, standing together, watching silently. The truck stopped near the gate. A tall, confident-looking man stepped out, wearing polished boots, a clean shirt, and a pair of sunglasses that reflected the bright sky. He carried a briefcase under his arm. Tom immediately knew the type: smooth talk, fast decisions, no interest in the land itself, only what it could offer him. The man introduced himself with a practiced smile. He explained that he represented a development company planning to buy land in the valley. According to him, the valley was perfect for a resort, maybe even vacation cabins. He spoke about potential profit, new roads, and modern buildings. Tom didn't say anything at first. He had heard these kinds of speeches before many years ago, when he was younger. Back then, he had refused offers, wanting to keep his land quiet and untouched. And now, once again, someone wanted to turn his peaceful world into something loud and crowded. The widows watched closely, their eyes narrowing with quiet concern. They understood situations like this all too well. Their own community had faced pressure from outsiders who tried to buy land too cheaply or push people out by creating problems. They knew the signs. The man continued talking, explaining that he had documents ready. He said he could make things easy for Tom. He said selling now would be better than waiting for future complications. The words sounded polite, but there was sharpness hidden underneath, something the widows sensed immediately. Tom finally spoke. He said he wasn't interested in selling. His voice was calm but firm. He had no intention of letting go of the ranch his father had once owned, and where he had spent most of his life. The land wasn't just property to him, it was home. The man's smile faded slightly, but he kept his tone polite. He said he would return in a few days in case Tom changed his mind. Then he drove away, leaving dust swirling behind him. After the truck disappeared, the widows gathered around Tom. They didn't say anything right away, but their expressions showed worry. Maria stepped forward and told Tom that these kinds of people rarely gave up easily. She said their community had faced similar threats before. Sometimes the pressure grew stronger before it stopped. Tom looked toward the road, thinking about the man's words. He felt a familiar heaviness forming in his chest. He had lived his life quietly, avoiding trouble whenever he could, but he knew the widows were right. The developer would return. The group spent the rest of the morning discussing the situation. Maria explained how land disputes often began with simple conversations but soon turned into more complicated problems. Taza suggested they should gather important documents, proof of ownership, maps, letters, anything that showed the ranch belonged clearly to Tom. Lena offered to help organize everything, saying she had handled paperwork before in her community. Tom hadn't dealt with documents in years, but he knew where the old files were stored, buried in boxes inside a dusty storage room. Together, they began sorting through them. The widows worked patiently, reading labels, cleaning off dust, and placing papers in neat stacks. Tom watched them with appreciation he didn't know how to express. He had never imagined he would see anyone else inside that storage room, let alone people helping him protect his home. They found old deeds, survey maps, and letters from previous property disputes that had long been resolved. The widows inspected each paper carefully. Maria pointed out which documents would be important if the developer pushed harder. Tom nodded, grateful for their guidance. In the afternoon, the widows suggested reaching out to their tribal community leaders. They said the leaders had experience dealing with outside developers and might offer advice. Tom agreed, and Alona walked to the ridge where phone signals were stronger. She made a call, speaking calmly and clearly. When she returned, she said someone from their community would contact Tom soon to discuss possible steps. The day continued with quiet work around the ranch, but the feeling of unity had grown stronger. The widows were not just guests anymore, they had become part of something larger, part of Tom's fight to protect the land. As evening approached, the widows prepared a meal to help everyone relax after the long day. The kitchen filled with warm smells again, and Tom felt himself softening despite the worry that still lingered in his thoughts. When they sat down to eat, Maria gently reminded him that trouble always feels smaller when people face it together. Her words carried a strength that comforted Tom more than he expected. After dinner, the group gathered outside to watch the sunset. The sky turned rich shades of orange and violet. The valley was quiet, almost as if the land itself was listening. Tom stood near the porch railing, thinking deeply. He wasn't alone anymore. The widows were here, and their presence had already changed how he viewed his responsibility to the ranch. As the light dimmed, Lena spoke softly. She said that land remembers those who protect it. Her words stayed with Tom, settling into his thoughts, like seeds taking root. The widows understood the value of land, not as a possession, but as something that held stories and memories. That night, Tom lay in bed with the window open, letting the cool desert breeze fill the room. He thought about the developer's visit, the widows' support, and the quiet strength they had shown all day. He realized that even if trouble came and he suspected it would, he would not face it the way he once did, alone and unsure. Instead, he had allies now, unexpected but steady, and deep inside, he felt a new kind of courage forming, shaped by kindness, companionship, and the understanding that some things are worth protecting not just for oneself, but for those who stand beside you. The last days of winter slowly passed, and warmth began returning to the land. The mountains that once looked cold and harsh now carried soft lines of melting snow, and the morning sun shone a little brighter every day. Ethan woke up earlier than usual that morning. He stepped outside with a warm cup of coffee in his hand and looked around the ranch. It felt different now, more alive, more peaceful, and more complete. He no longer saw only empty land and silent rooms. He heard sounds of laughter coming from the kitchen window and soft footsteps as the women worked together in harmony. After years of silence, he had people who cared about the place as much as he did. Inside the house, the 5 Apache widows were already busy with their morning chores, speaking softly among themselves and preparing breakfast. Over the months, Ethan had grown close to each of them in his own quiet way. He admired their strength, their discipline, and how easily they adapted to ranch life. They had repaired old things he had ignored, organized areas he had forgotten, and most importantly, brought warmth back to a lonely home. Maya was placing bread near the fire, humming to herself. Alina arranged herbs in small jars she had made from spare glass. Tala was grinding corn with careful rhythm. Raina was stitching a blanket, adding tiny designs inspired by their ancestors, and Sora was cleaning the last of the winter dust from the windows. When Ethan entered, the women all paused and greeted him with soft smiles. He felt grateful every morning for the way they treated him, as if he were a part of their story too. For a long moment, Ethan simply watched them. He remembered how uncertain everything had felt the day they arrived. They had been tired, carrying heavy grief from the loss of their home and families. Ethan had been lonely, unsure of whether he could ever live peacefully again. None of them knew what the future held at that time. Now, months later, the ranch felt like a small world where new beginnings grew quietly and naturally. After breakfast, Ethan gathered everyone near the large wooden table in the sitting room. It was time for a small celebration. Spring was approaching, and he wanted to acknowledge everything they had built together during the winter. He placed a small sack on the table. The widows watched curiously. "I know this winter was long," Ethan said, his voice gentle. "But you helped change everything here. So I made something for each of you." He opened the sack and revealed 5 small wooden tokens. He had carved them by hand during late nights when everyone else was asleep. Each one carried a symbol he felt matched the strength of the woman it was meant for. The widows looked at them with wide eyes as he explained the meaning behind each carving. For Maya, he carved a blooming flower. She had brought light and softness to the house, filling it with warmth and calm energy. For Alina, he carved a tall pine tree, steady and dependable. For Tala, the carving was a circle, with patterns showing balance. because she always kept harmony in the house. For Reyna, he carved a small sun, because she was the one who reminded everyone to stay hopeful. And for Sora, he carved a bird taking flight, because she had helped him see his life from a new, brighter direction. The moment was quiet, but full of emotion. The widows held the tokens with care, clearly touched by the effort he had put into making them. Ethan didn't speak much, but the thoughtfulness behind each carving said everything. Maya stepped forward and thanked him in her gentle voice, expressing how much the gesture meant to them. After the small ceremony, they all went outside to prepare for the coming spring work. There was soil to turn, fences to repair, and supplies to organize. Each person moved with purpose. Ethan worked alongside them, feeling the energy of a new season settling onto the land. Where once he worked alone, he now had companions who made the work lighter and the days brighter. Later in the afternoon, they all gathered near the field behind the house. Ethan pointed at the old barn that had been standing unused for years. "We should repair that too," he suggested. The women agreed. Even though the barn was old, it held potential, and like everything else on the ranch now, it could be given new life with enough care. They spent hours cleaning it, brushing away dust, clearing old tools, fixing loose boards, and allowing sunlight to enter through the windows that had been blocked for years. The widows turned it into a place with purpose again. Their presence transformed the barn from a forgotten structure into a part of the ranch's future. As they worked, they talked about simple things, stories from their past, dreams they had for the future, things they had learned through hardships. Ethan listened quietly. He was never a man of many words, but he felt connected to their stories. Each woman carried her own strength, shaped by challenges he could only imagine. He admired how they faced life with dignity and resilience. As evening approached, the group finished the barn repairs and stepped outside to watch the sky turn orange and pink. It was one of those sunsets that made the whole world look peaceful. Ethan stood beside them, feeling something he hadn't felt in years, a sense of belonging. Maya softly said that the sunset reminded her of the place she grew up. Alina mentioned that she felt safe here in a way she hadn't felt in a long time. Tala said the land felt kind, as if it welcomed them. Reyna spoke about how they had healed during these months. Sora, usually quiet, simply said that she hoped they could stay here forever. The words settled gently around Ethan. He didn't expect to feel emotional, but he did. He realized that this wasn't just a temporary arrangement anymore. They had become a community. They had created a peaceful life together without forcing anything. Everything had grown naturally, step by step. That night, after dinner, they all sat near the fireplace. It was the last cold night of the season. Ethan listened as the widows talked about their plans for spring planting. They wanted to start a small garden together, grow herbs, vegetables, and flowers. The idea made Ethan smile. The ranch had never had a real garden before. It had always been too empty, too quiet. Now it was going to be full of life. Before everyone went to their rooms, Maya approached Ethan and asked a gentle question. She wanted to know if he was happy with all the changes that had come into his life. Ethan paused, then nodded slowly. He said that he didn't know he needed change until they arrived. He had spent years believing that loneliness was simply a part of his life. Now he understood that he had only been waiting for the right people to enter his world. Maya smiled warmly and returned to the others, sharing his smile with them. The night ended on a peaceful note, full of quiet hope. As spring finally arrived in full, the ranch transformed. Flowers began to bloom. Trees regained their color. Birds returned to the land. The 5 widows planted their garden with love and care, and Ethan helped them build a fence to protect it. Every day became a routine of meaningful work, shared meals, gentle laughter, and the slow building of a shared future. Ethan had once believed his life would end in silence, but the arrival of 5 women who simply wanted shelter had changed everything. They had brought life, warmth, and companionship into a place long forgotten, and in return, Ethan had given them a home where they could heal and rebuild. As the days grew warmer, he looked around the ranch, feeling grateful for the unexpected path his life had taken. The widows were no longer just guests. They had become a part of his story, and he had become a part of theirs. Their journey together was only beginning. But it was clear that whatever challenges or joys came next, they would face them as a family. One, built not by chance, but by choice, respect, and a quiet bond that grew stronger with every passing day.